Everybody's talking about how brutal Punisher One Last Kill is, but honestly, the violence isn't even the craziest part of this special. The craziest part is how exhausted Frank Castle feels. And I mean that in the best way possible. This Disney Plus special could have easily just been another excuse to throw Jon Bernthal into a hallway with guns, blood, and angry monologues. And yes, you absolutely get that. The action in this thing is savage, like genuinely uncomfortable at times. But underneath all of that, there's this weird sadness hanging over the entire story that makes it hit harder than expected. Because Frank doesn't feel like a superhero anymore. He feels like a man who's been fighting for so long that he barely remembers why he started. And that's what surprised me most about One Last Kill. The first half is actually pretty slow compared to what fans probably expect. If you're going into this wanting non-stop action from minute one, you might get impatient. The special takes its time showing Frank mentally unraveling again. He's isolated, angry, barely sleeping, constantly replaying the past in his head. It's very psychological. But here's the issue. We've kind of seen this version of Frank before. That's the biggest weakness of the special for me. Emotionally, it repeats a lot of the same ideas from the Netflix series. Frank blaming himself, Frank trapped in grief, Frank unable to move on. Jon Bernthal still performs it incredibly, but story-wise, it starts feeling familiar instead of fresh. And honestly, I kept waiting for the special to push the character somewhere new. It almost does. There are moments where it hints that Frank is finally questioning whether revenge actually means anything anymore. Those scenes are easily the strongest writing in the special because they give Bernthal room to do more than just rage and scream. You can see the exhaustion on his face the entire time. That's why he still owns this role. Nobody plays Frank Castle like Jon Bernthal, not because he's the biggest or toughest version of the character, but because he makes Frank feel broken. Even when he's brutally destroying people, there's always pain underneath it. You believe this guy is carrying years of trauma every second he's on screen. And when the action finally explodes in the second half, yeah, Marvel absolutely knew what fans wanted. The final 20 minutes are insane. This is probably the most violent Punisher content Disney has ever released. And surprisingly, they don't hold back much at all. The choreography feels raw and desperate instead of overly polished. Frank isn't fighting like a stylish assassin. He's fighting like a man trying to survive. Every punch looks painful. Every gunshot feels loud. And there's one sequence in particular, without spoiling too much, where Frank basically has to fight his way through wave after wave of enemies while trapped in a confined space. That entire section feels like a mix between John Wick and The Raid, but with the dirtier, uglier energy that Punisher should have. The camera work deserves credit too. A lot of modern action scenes are edited so aggressively that you can barely tell what's happening. This special actually lets shots breathe. You can follow the movement. You can see Frank improvising with weapons, using the environment, reacting in real time. It feels chaotic without becoming messy. And honestly, that's why the violence works. Not because it's shocking, but because it feels physical. You feel every hit. Now, I do think the villains are underdeveloped. That's another major problem. There's one character introduced who clearly should have had a much bigger emotional impact, but the special moves too quickly to really explore them properly. You understand their motivation, but they never become truly memorable, which is unfortunate because the emotional side of the story needed a stronger opposing force. Instead, the action kind of becomes the main event by default. But thankfully, the action delivers. And by the end, I actually walked away more hopeful about Punisher's future in the MCU than I expected to, because this didn't feel watered down. That was the biggest fear going into it, right? Fans were terrified Disney would sanitize the character or turn Frank into a generic anti-hero. But this special proves they understand what makes Punisher work. He's not supposed to be clean. He's not supposed to be inspirational. He's a damaged man trapped in an endless cycle of violence, and the special fully embraces that darkness. Is it perfect? No. The story definitely repeats familiar emotional beats, and I wish the writing had taken bigger risks with Frank psychologically. But as an experience, it's intense, brutal, emotional, and surprisingly human underneath all the blood. And for longtime Punisher fans, that's probably enough. Because after years of waiting to see Jon Bernthal return properly, this finally feels like Frank Castle again.